Konnichiwa, Mina! And now it's time for Week 16 of the 2016 PFA season, the week of November 27th to 28th. But first, here's the standings. And as we look at the standings after Week 15, Washington leads Boston by 2.5 games in the National East. Then Omaha last week clinched the National Central, and they have a 6-game lead over second place Denver still. Atlanta has the tiebreaker over Birmingham in the National South, and Phoenix still has the tiebreaker over Los Angeles and Portland in the National West. In the Century Conference in the Century East, Baltimore has a 2-game lead over Pittsburgh. Chicago has a 3-game lead over Minneapolis in the Century Central. New Orleans has a half-a-game lead over Dallas in the Century South. And San Diego has a 1-game lead over San Francisco in the Century West. Now we take a look at the playoff standings. In the National Conference, Omaha, being the only team in the playoffs at the moment, still has the number 1 spot, with Washington now having the 2nd spot, Phoenix with the 3rd spot, Atlanta with the 4th spot, Los Angeles with the 5th spot, and Portland with the 6th spot. Now as for some eliminations, Jacksonville and Oakland will be eliminated if they lose. Cleveland would be eliminated if they lose, Los Angeles wins, and Portland and Phoenix tie. And there is one playoff clinching scenario this week, and that is Omaha can clinch home field, not first round bye if they win. Los Angeles loses, and this is a tough one, like I said last week, Phoenix and Portland have to tie. If all that happens, Omaha would clinch a first round bye. And then we go into the Century Conference, and believe it or not, there's still no playoff clinching scenario this week. This is unbelievable. But anyways, El Paso will be eliminated if they lose, and Detroit will be eliminated if they lose. And now here's the schedule for Week 16, and we got to start off with 1 p.m. games with Tampa at Atlanta, New Orleans at Cincinnati, Kansas City at Detroit, Birmingham at Jacksonville, Oakland at Louisville, Houston at Miami, Indianapolis at Milwaukee, a big showdown, Boston at Omaha, Philadelphia at Orlando, and Los Angeles at San Diego. San Antonio, that'll be important. Then the 4 p.m. games, Pittsburgh at Columbus, San Diego at El Paso, Seattle at Honolulu, Denver at Las Vegas, that'll be important. A big Century Conference game, Dallas at Minneapolis, and a big National West Conference Division game, Portland at Phoenix, and then Buffalo at San Francisco, and then the Sunday nighter, Chicago going to Cleveland, and Monday night, Manhattan at Washington. So now let's take a look at the results for Week 16. And we start off with a National South Division game with the Tampa Tropics still trying to get their first win. Visit the Atlanta Trojans, a rematch from earlier this season. And Atlanta would win in a defensive struggle, 13-9, to drop Tampa to 0-14. They're still trying to get their first win, along with Louisville. Tampa Bay's running back Edward Robinson had 28 attempts, 123 yards, and 0 touchdowns. Atlanta's running back Kenneth Dixon had 25 attempts, 116 yards, and no touchdown. But their wide receiver Joseph Emons had 4 receptions, 130 yards, and a touchdown. So Atlanta will still remain ahead of Birmingham for another week. Then we go up to Cincinnati from a rematch of a couple weeks ago. The New Orleans Jazz visit the Cincinnati Colts, and New Orleans Jazz would win 36-17, scoring 24 unanswered points in the third quarter to get their first win season ever. New Orleans running back James Williams was 21-31 for 307 yards, 2 touchdowns and an interception. Their wide receiver Mark Matson was 5 receptions, 109 yards. Cincinnati wide receiver John Griffin, 3 receptions, 107 yards and a touchdown. And New Orleans linebacker Joe Farley, 11 tackles. And another linebacker, Jeffrey Cornell, 10 tackles and an interception. Cincinnati did play good in that game, but they were just outplayed by New Orleans. Then we go up to Detroit and Ford Field for a divisional matchup in the Century Central as the Detroit Engines host the Kansas City Hammerheads. And Kansas City would crush Detroit 40-21 to eliminate Detroit from the playoffs. Kansas City scored 26 unanswered points between the second and third quarter, and Detroit's cornerback William Pender had 13 tackles, so not a bad day for him. And Kansas City, after starting off 0-5 and 1-6, are now 7-7. They're back at 500. And Detroit, they've now lost 7 in a row. Then we go down to Everbank Field in Jacksonville as the Jacksonville Bucks host the Birmingham Hornets. Birmingham needs the win to keep right up there with Atlanta, and Jacksonville needs the win to stay in the playoffs. But Jacksonville would be eliminated as Birmingham won 27-17 to give Jacksonville their first losing season ever and eliminate them from the playoffs. Birmingham's quarterback Marcus Thompson was 18 of 30, 204 yards, 0 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. But Jacksonville's quarterback Michael Witters was 16 of 22, 233 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. Birmingham's running back Guy Metz, 21 attempts, 120 yards, 0 touchdowns. 7 sacks by Birmingham's defense. That was incredible. And they're 6-1 after starting off 3-4. Not bad for Birmingham. Then we go down to Louisville, where the winless Louisville Saints host the Oakland Majors. Louisville's still trying to get their first win, and Oakland's trying to win 4 in a row. And in an upset, Louisville would finally get their first win, 14-12, and they would eliminate Oakland from the playoffs. Oakland's wide receiver Joshua Crane was 4 receptions, 107 yards, and 0 touchdowns. But Louisville's running back Scott Buino, 5 receptions, 114 yards, and a touchdown. 8 sacks by both. 8 sacks, 4 each by each team. And Louisville's linebacker Larry Mercier, 12 tackles and a forced fumble. That was a very crucial one too, because that fumble did help get them one of those touchdowns. So congratulations to Louisville finally getting their first win. Now if only Tampa can get their first win. Then it's down to Miami, where the 6-game winning streak Miami Sharks host the Houston Twisters, who are coming off that terrible beatdown against Las Vegas where they lost 51-0. Houston would end Miami's win streak at 6 in overtime as they won 16-13. Miami's quarterback Anthony McCormick was injured during the game very early on, but he'll be ready to go for Monday night at hosting Buffalo next week. But their running back Douglas Jackson, 17 carries, 110 yards and 0 touchdowns. But Houston wide receiver Robert Brown, 4 receptions, 114 yards and no touchdowns. Houston's kicker Henry Gallegos completed only half the field goals. If he could have completed just one of those in regulation, he could have won the team outright instead of going to overtime. And Miami's cornerback Shannon Wilson, 10 tackles and an interception. That was a very devastating loss for Miami after that 6-game winning streak. Then it's out to Miller Park, where the Indianapolis Express visit the Milwaukee Lakers, who finally are going to get their regular starting quarterback, Herman McLendon, back, who is finally playing for the first time since Week 8 after tearing an abdominal muscle. He played good in his game back, but it was not enough to stop Indianapolis, who have now won 3 in a row in a dominant fashion, 28-13, as Milwaukee has now lost 7 in a row. Indianapolis quarterback Rodney Sanders was 17 of 26, 273 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. And Herman McLendon was 19 of 25, 358 yards, and a touchdown and no picks in his first game back after 8 weeks. Indianapolis running back Kevin Smith had 2 good games in a row now, 16 attempts, 106 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And now wide receiver Kevin Ivey, who made the game-winning touchdown against Denver last week, 4 receptions, 123 yards, but no touchdown. Man, Indianapolis is suddenly turning around, but of course it's too late for them to save their season. And Milwaukee still needs to try and save theirs. Then it's out to Omaha as the undefeated and only team in the playoffs, Omaha Thunder, host the Boston Destroyers in the final home game for the Omaha Thunder until the playoffs. And we're going to get sleet in this game, the first time we're going to get any sort of snow in PFA history. And the sleet played a factor as Omaha would win 17-13 in a defensive struggle. And they can clinch first round bye if Los Angeles loses and Phoenix and Portland tie. Omaha's wide receiver Stephen Carmona, 4 receptions, 116 yards, but no touchdown. And their linebacker Christopher Miller, 10 tackles. And this was the final home game, like I said, for Omaha until the playoffs. So we can't wait. So they got to play 4 in a row now away against a lot of very tough opponents. So I can't wait to see what they do. Then we're down in sunny Orlando as the Orlando Astros host the Philadelphia Hawks, who have played 2 games in a row unstoppable on offense. But Orlando would win 21-16 to win their 4th game of the year. It would knock Philadelphia down to 6-8. Orlando's quarterback Milton Hester was 15 of 21, 294 yards, 3 touchdowns and a pick. and their wide receiver Joshua Moses, 3 receptions, 143 yards, 2 touchdowns. And Orlando linebacker James Lyons, 12 tackles, 2 forced fumbles. That was a very important deciding factor in the game. And their strong safety Raymond Height, 12 tackles, and one of those fumbles that Lyons forced, he recovered and went far back deep into Philadelphia territory to help get one of those touchdowns. For the first time in weeks, that Orlando defense has finally got rid of all the injuries, and they look strong in their return. Then we go south to the Alamo Dome as the Los Antonio Longhorns host the Los Angeles Angels, and Los Angeles needs to lose to get Omaha closer to clinching first-round bye. No idea why it says rain, because it's indoors. But it would not be the case for Omaha, as Los Angeles would win 17-7 to clinch their first winning season ever, and that would eliminate Omaha's chance from clinching first-round bye for another week. Los Angeles' running back John Fox was 23 attempts, 100 yards, and a touchdown. And their linebacker Julius Cersei, 11 tackles and an interception. Not a bad game at all for their defense. But a disappointing loss now for San Antonio. Then we get to the 4 p.m. games as the Pittsburgh Blitz visit their Century East Division rival Columbus Barons. Columbus fought hard, but it was not enough to beat Pittsburgh as they won 28-10. And Pittsburgh has got their first win season in franchise history. Their quarterback Cruz Tolbert finally had a good game for once, 29 of 40, 291 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. Wide receiver Gary Berry had 6 receptions, 112 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And Columbus wide receiver Salvatore Nixon had 3 receptions, 105 yards, but no touchdowns. But their linebacker William Flafer, 15 tackles and a forced fumble. And Pittsburgh's defense had 6 sacks. Now Pittsburgh's only within a game's reach of Baltimore for the Century East title. And it's out in El Paso for a Century West division matchup with the San Diego Rays visiting the El Paso Mustangs. El Paso needing to win to catch up with everyone in the Century Conference and to hopefully not get eliminated from the playoffs. And San Diego needs to win to get closer and closer to clinching a playoff spot. El Paso fought hard except on offense, but San Diego would win 31-28 to knock both El Paso out of the playoffs and give them their first losing season. But God, that offense, the passing offense of El Paso was god-awful bad. Their running game and their defense fought hard at first to get them that huge lead. They had an 18-point lead at one point, and they blew it. San Diego's quarterback Bobby Valentine was 25 of 32, 312 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. El Paso's running back Allen Davis had another great game, 13 attempts, 142 yards, and a touchdown. And San Diego wide receiver David Seaton, 6 receptions, 140 yards, and a touchdown. Well, with El Paso eliminated, that would put a cap to their very, very, very disappointing season with just 3 more games left to go. Then it's out to Honolulu as the Honolulu Phantoms host the Seattle Quakes in a very humid day here in Honolulu. And Honolulu would trounce the Quakes 27-10. Although both offenses were terrible, Honolulu's wide receiver Eric Fay, 7 receptions, 115 yards, and a touchdown. Seattle's quarterback Shane Jones had 11 tackles, but Honolulu's linebacker Wilson Sharp had 11 tackles. So now Honolulu has now won 2 in a row, and Seattle has now lost 2 in a row. Then it's out to Las Vegas as the Las Vegas Gamblers host the Denver Miners in a very, very important game for both teams that they need to win if they want to have any shot to make it to the playoffs in their respective conference. And Denver would win 20-14. Las Vegas scored 14 points in the first quarter, but they scored nothing ever since. And their running back James Beverly had 19 carries, 120 yards, and a touchdown, including a 150-yard reception. And their linebacker Zakaria Bennett had 11 tackles. Man, Zachary Ellis had really his first bad game, but it was still good enough to get the victory. Then we go up north to Minneapolis in the coldest game in PFA history so far, 34 degrees, but it was a clear day, as a very important Century Conference game as the Dallas Stars visit the Minneapolis Kitsune, a win needed by both teams to not only get close to a playoff spot, but maybe possibly a division win from either one. In a very ugly game, Minneapolis' offense absolutely collapses as Dallas would win 44-6 to clinch their first ever win season. Oh my god, Minneapolis' quarterback, Philip Ainsworth, was 12 of 36, 175 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 3 picks. Dallas wide receiver Randy Hale, 6 receptions, 117 yards, and a touchdown. Their other wide receiver, Jonathan Kasky, 5 receptions, 101 yards, and 0 touchdowns. Their linebacker, Victor Shores, had 10 tackles, and Minneapolis' linebacker, Eric Witt, 10 tackles. Man, Minneapolis, after starting 3-0, they've gone 5-6 since. They really need to get Samuel Clark back. That was an absolute embarrassment what we saw today by that team. And then after that, we go to a very important National West game as the Phoenix Storm are hosted by the Portland Dragons, a divisional rematch from a couple weeks ago when Phoenix beat Portland 34-0. But at the Portland Dragons, let's see what would happen this week. It would be close, but Phoenix would win once again, 23-20 to clinch their first win season. And Portland would be now 2-5 after starting 7-0, and they've now lost 3 in a row. Phoenix quarterback James Kearse, 18 of 25, 318 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no picks. And Phoenix quarterback Frederick Van Dyke, 24-33, 230 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Phoenix wide receiver Craig McCaskill, 7 receptions, 102 yards, and a touchdown. And other wide receiver Juan Legge, 4 receptions, 123 yards, and a touchdown. And Portland's linebacker Stephen Fowler, 11 tackles. That was a very devastating loss for Portland, especially since they got to play Los Angeles next week. Then we get another rematch from last week as the Buffalo Sabres visit the San Francisco Union a week after they just lost in the highest scoring game in PFA history of 82. But San Francisco is struggling now since they lost their quarterback, John Getz, probably for the entire year due to injury, and his backup, Ruben Williams, who played solid in his backup role last week against Buffalo. Let's see how he does this week. In another hard-fought game, Buffalo would stay undefeated on the road, 34-31, and Buffalo's quarterback Ricky Bale, 24 of 40, 200 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no interceptions. And San Francisco's quarterback Ruben Williams make his first start, 15 of 28, 196 yards, but 4 touchdowns. But it wasn't enough as they were down 34-7 at one point. They were really far back. San Francisco running back Anthony Marks, 25 attempts, 109 yards, and 0 touchdowns. Buffalo's linebacker James Ferris, 12 tackles, 2 forced fumbles, and recovering 1. And San Francisco's cornerback Jules Staten, 10 tackles. Another disappointing loss for San Francisco, especially since they got to play San Diego next week without their starting QB. Oh, that's not looking good for them. Then we get to Sunday night as the Chicago 71ers visit the Cleveland Bulldogs as Cleveland's lost 3 in a row. And it could have been a possible preview of the PFA Bowl like at the very early season. Now that's not the case, but Cleveland needs to win badly to get back in the playoff hunt, and Chicago needs to win to keep up against San Diego in the Century Conference. Cleveland would win in a hard-fought game, 28-16. Chicago quarterback Matthew Smart was 24-35, 291 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. And Cleveland's quarterback Scott Hernandez had his best game in a long time, 15 of 26, 258 yards, 4 touchdowns, and no interception. Wide receiver David Tupia, 6 receptions, 115 yards, and a touchdown. And Cleveland wide receiver Gerald Todd finally had his best game of his career, 5 receptions, 111 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Finally, he played like a fourth overall pick. Cleveland linebacker Gary Simon had 11 tackles, and Emmanuel San Echoes had 10 tackles. What a terrible loss that was for Cleveland, because now they're tied with San Diego for the number 1 spot in the Century Conference. And then the final game of the week, Monday night, the Manhattan Greens being hosted by the Washington Americans, a reminiscent of the NFC East Giants and Redskins. And Washington would now win 4 in a row, beating Manhattan 27-20. Washington quarterback Roy Rice was 20 of 33, 235 yards and a touchdown. And Manhattan had two wide receivers going over 100 yards. David Needhill had 7 receptions for 113 yards and 2 touchdowns. But Lawrence Irons had 6 receptions, 136 yards, but could not get a touchdown. And Washington linebacker Eric Donald had 12 tackles, 1 sack, and a forced fumble. Well, with that incredible Week 16 out of the way, here's the standings after Week 16. As Washington now leads Boston by 3 games in the National East. Omaha's lead against Denver in the National West is still 7. Atlanta still has the tiebreaker over Birmingham in the National South. And Phoenix now has the tiebreaker over Los Angeles in the National West. In the Century East, Baltimore's lead against Pittsburgh now dropped to 1 game. Chicago's lead over Minneapolis still remains free since they both lost this week. New Orleans still has a half a game lead over Dallas in the Century South. And the Century West, San Diego now leads by 3 over San Francisco, actually by 2. And Omaha is the only team still in the playoffs, and they are still undefeated, and Tampa now remains the only winless team. So now here's the standings in the National Conference, as Omaha still has the number 1 spot, with Washington having the 2nd spot. Phoenix got 3rd seed, Atlanta's got the 4th seed, Los Angeles got the 5th seed, and now Birmingham has the 6th seed, as Portland has now fallen out of the playoff picture at the moment. Holy shit. And there's a bunch of playoff scenarios happening this week. With Omaha, they still can clinch first round bye if they win or Phoenix and Los Angeles loses. And they can clinch home field advantage if they win and Washington loses. Ain't that incredible how they still have a 3-game lead over 2nd place, and they can clinch home field advantage finally this week. Washington will join Omaha as a playoff team. They can clinch a playoff spot and the National East if they win or Boston loses. Also, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and Cleveland will be eliminated if they lose and either Birmingham or Portland wins. Then we go over to the Century Conference, where we have a tie for the number 1 spot now, but Chicago still has a tiebreaker over San Diego, as San Diego has the 2nd spot. Baltimore still has the 3rd spot. New Orleans has the 4th seed. Pittsburgh has the 5th seed. And now Dallas has the 6th seed. And we can finally get some playoff scenarios this week, as Chicago will clinch a playoff spot and the Century Central if they win and Minneapolis loses. San Diego also will clinch a playoff spot if they beat San Francisco, and Baltimore will clinch a playoff spot if they win and Minneapolis loses. Seattle and Houston will be eliminated if they lose. Buffalo will be eliminated if they lose, and Baltimore and Pittsburgh win. But that's it for playoff standings. Now let's take a look at the schedule for next week. First up for the 1 p.m. games will be Louisville going to Atlanta, Philadelphia going to Boston, Honolulu going to Cincinnati, Jacksonville going to Columbus, San Antonio going to Indianapolis, the winless Tampa Tropics going to Kansas City, Birmingham going to Manhattan, Phoenix going to Milwaukee, Oakland going to Minneapolis, Omaha going to New Orleans, that's going to be a big game, Chicago going to Oklahoma, that's going to be a big one, Detroit going to Orlando, and then a big showdown, Pittsburgh going to Washington. Oh, I can't wait for that. And then another big showdown at 4. San Diego going to San Francisco. A matchup between the only 2 teams really that can win the Central West. And then Seattle going to Las Vegas. And then another big showdown in the National West, as Portland will be going to Los Angeles. And then Baltimore going to El Paso. And then Sunday night, Columbus going to Houston. Ooh, what a terrible matchup would that be. And then the Monday nighter, Buffalo going to Miami. I don't know about you all, but I can't wait for Week 17 as we're down to the final 4 weeks as we get into December. I can't wait to see the results next week as we hopefully get more teams qualified for the playoffs. So see you soon for Week 17. Done it.